Good, let's go. So welcome to the public board meeting for October. I particularly want to welcome Morwenna Stewart, who is from our Disability Equality Network. Morwenna, you're extremely welcome, and do please contribute as you wish as we go through the meeting. We have one apology for absence, which is from Rosie Bennyworth. Other than that, we're all here. Does anybody have anything they need to declare by way of additional declaration of interest? That's good. We are quorate. That then moves us on to the minutes of our September meeting. Are they a true and accurate record of everything that we discussed? Thank you. We'll take those as approved. There's one item in the action log, which is around the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian 6-monthly report. That is on our agenda for today, so that is done. Was there anything else arising that anybody wanted to raise that's not otherwise on the agenda? Somebody's hand's gone up. Who's that?
It's me, Chairman, Mark.
Mark, sorry, yes.
Yeah, just wanted to say that item 13 about people metrics and KPIs, that Kirsty and I had a good meeting, and that is moving forward with the involvement of the People Directorate. So it was an action that we both had, and we've started the process.
Great, thank you, Mark. Anything else arising? In which case, Ian, can we move on to your executive team's report, please?
Thanks, Peter. As you'd expect, COVID has somewhat dominated our work over the last month. I think it's fair to say that we've seen just from news coverage alone, we've seen that the pace of work nationally around COVID has increased. And we've seen that as citizens in the same way we've seen that as a regulator. And the work that we've been engaged in over the last month or so really is to try and establish an appropriate tempo of work over the coming months. In an environment, I think, which we described in State of Care as being in a COVID era, I think we need to recognise that we're in a period now where COVID is going to remain a pretty intrusive part of our lives for the foreseeable future. The Prime Minister talked about when he first talked about the second wave as needing to have some restrictions in place for the next 6 months. Now, I fear that given the current progress of the virus and what's going on internationally, I'd expect that COVID will be a part of our lives for most of the coming calendar year. And we as an organisation need to make sure that we can cope with that, and that's exactly the work that we're doing. I think this time around it'd be fair to say that we are better prepared, and also those that we regulate are better prepared. So I think the first time around there was a sense that the virus wasn't understood. We were all struggling to make sure that there was a real focus on supporting people with COVID, and that focus is still there. But I think we now have better tools and techniques and approaches that we can deploy both on site and also off site. We've got a much clearer view as to the sorts of work we should be doing and the sorts of work that perhaps is of a lower order of priority. I know individual colleagues, particularly the chief inspectors, will talk in more detail about areas of the COVID work in their particular areas, but our overall intention is to continue to focus on looking for risks in providers. And we are, just to reiterate the point which we've made a number of times, we are not, and I say again, not doing routine inspections at the moment. We are focusing in on areas of risk. We're looking for those things which are perhaps exceptions that we need to do. But fundamentally, we are about looking for risk and then responding to that on behalf of the public. We launched the State of Care report last week. State of Care, as you know, is our annual report. And in it, we talked about the importance of providers being able to deliver safe care for all, not just those people with COVID. And Chris, I know, will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But But our fundamental point is that we were making a point about equalities and making sure that that everybody gets the care they need, and with a particular emphasis on making sure that providers can appropriately recover some of the services which were understandably suspended during the first onset of COVID, but we can't continue to see services suspended indefinitely, particularly if we accept the notion that COVID will be with us for the next 6 to 12 months. I would like to just take this opportunity publicly to thank all of my colleagues for the work they put into around state of care, and thank Chris Day for his leadership of bringing it all together, which he does so well each year. But it is very much a team effort, and I think it reflects an annual report of us as a regulator, which reflects the work that 3,500 people do to pull together an evidence base that just reinforces our position as an authoritative and independent voice on health and social care. And I know that's appreciated by the public, it's appreciated by government, and it's appreciated by providers themselves. In terms of some of the practical things we've done, we've gone live with the transitional regulatory approach. And we've got a training program which is rolling out as we speak, and we'll be going live with that over the next few weeks across all of our sectors and all of our inspectors. And this transitional approach will evolve over the next few weeks and months into our future regulatory platform in May of 2021, in line with our strategy. October is Black History Month and also Speak Up Month, and we've run a number of events internally this month to promote both subjects to all of our colleagues, to make sure that people are aware of both topics. And in terms of looking forward, we will continue to work on ensuring that we're making a constructive contribution to the national effort on COVID. Some of those things will be around what we do as a regulator, but of course we have contacts and relationships right across health and social care, and if we can use those for the greater good in terms of the COVID effort, then of course we will do that. And we're trying to deal with the problems of today, whilst at the same time thinking ahead and thinking longer term, and making sure that our internal transformation activity continues on track as far as it possibly can, to try and support the rollout of our new strategy, as I say, which we are expecting to put out in May of next year. And finally, just a plug on in terms of the strategy, we launched a discussion document at the beginning of October, and that's now with providers, it's with colleagues internally, it's with a number of other stakeholders, and we're trying to get a conversation going around our future strategy and what should be in it for the new year. And in the new year, we'll be running a consultation process. But my plug would be to anyone listening is that if they haven't seen our discussion documents on our website, please do take a look and give us your thoughts. I'm going to pause there, Peter, and ask for questions before we move on to colleagues. Thanks, Peter.
So thanks, Ian, and can I just add my thanks, Chris, to you and your team for the State of Care report, which yet again I think is a really comprehensive review of health and social care, and very well written. So thank you. Does anybody want to raise anything, or shall we move on? Liz.
Thanks very much, Ian. You mentioned the transitional regulatory approach and that being rolled out sort of as we speak. And I just wondered, it may be too early to say, but I just wondered if there's any learning from that yet to feed into the longer term outcomes and benefits that we're looking to achieve from our future regulatory model, but, you know, obviously evolving from this transitional approach.
I think it's probably too early at this stage to capture specific learning in terms of its external impact. I think what we have seen now is the way that we have designed the approach, the way we're carrying out the training, using things like super users, and that kind of that clear evolutionary approach from the start has been really powerful. We saw that during the emergency support framework during the early part of the COVID process, and we've reused that learning again for the transitional regulatory approach. And again, we're seeing that's seen as a very positive way of training people. It's a way of being able to train people remotely, obviously because all the training is having to be done remotely. So I think in terms of the training and rollout, I think we've learned a number of lessons. I think there's some real positivity there. I think it's too early to tell though in terms of what impact that's having on providers. I think providers said they liked the emergency support framework when we surveyed them over the summer, but the questions and the breadth of the work we're doing as part of the transitional approach is much broader, and maybe we'll get some different learning as we roll this out.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, Ian, should we move on?
Should we move on to Kate?
To Kate. Thank you.
Morning all. So I'm going to start with an update on our activity in adult social care around COVID. So as of Friday, we have had regulatory action with over 17,500 of our social care providers. And the majority of those actions have been our emergency support framework, our structured monitoring conversations to provide support to providers, but also to identify risk and respond accordingly. We've done over 1,200 physical inspections, and these have been a mixture of going out and visiting a service in person where the risk was sufficiently high for us to need to do so. And the rest of those inspections have been inspections around infection prevention and control. So over the summer, Board will remember that we developed a new methodology around infection prevention and control, IPC. And we were really keen that as well as looking at IPC on every single regulatory conversation we have with providers, every time we go out and inspect, we are having a kind of laser focus on IPC. But that in addition to looking at IPC as triggered by a risk, we wanted to go out and see what best practice was for IPC so that we could shine a spotlight on it and encourage all providers to follow suit so they're as ready as possible for wave 2 and winter. So those inspections have been happening. We did 301 inspections when we went out to goods services and looked at IPC, and then we did a number of risk-based inspections. Our methodology looks at the key ingredients that need to be in place to ensure good IPC happens. So it spans from ensuring providers have access to PPE and are using it properly, through to training for staff and policy, through to their approach for visiting. So it covers 8 areas. It's important to say that our judgments when we go out and look for assurance are not a guarantee that a service is not going to get COVID in it. It's about saying, have they got the best ingredients in place to stop COVID coming into their home, and if it comes into their home, that it is managed as effectively as possible so it doesn't spread to other residents and staff. So we look across these 8 areas. We've developed our 8 ticks of IPC assurance. So when you go to the web page to look at one of the 400 plus IPC inspections we've published, you will be able to click through on a detailed report, but you will also be able to see the front screen that will show across the 8 areas whether we're assured, somewhat assured and not assured. And just to reassure Board, where we are finding instances where we are not assured, depending on what we find, we will obviously take the required regulatory action to ensure that those issues are addressed and people receive safe care. So we have undertaken a whole lot of IPC activity. We were planning on continuing to do that through autumn. So we have 500 IPC inspections booked in across the country to happen between now and the end of November, with those 2 focuses: what's best practice and responding to risk. We've also been asked to support government's winter plan, and they have asked us whether we can use our IPC methodology when government has asked local authorities to identify potential cases where people with a COVID positive test might be discharged from hospital, to keep them safe and to stop the spread of COVID. So government asked local authorities to identify these places. That request went out middle of last week, and we are primed and ready to respond to those places once local authorities identify them. So it might be a repurposing of a current service that's already registered with us, in which case we will go out and do an IPC inspection with an increased focus on ensuring that people can be zoned and cared for in a way that means that there isn't a risk of that, or there's a reduced risk of that spreading to other people in the home. If local authorities and other health leaders decide that they want to establish a new service, we are also primed and ready in registration to prioritise the registration of new services for this purpose as well. So we've got 500 IPC inspections booked in, and we are ready to reprioritise in response to the local authorities identifying to us where these designated schemes might be for people with a COVID positive discharge to be discharged to. A couple of other things. Ted, Rosie and I put out a statement about 2 weeks ago about our expectations about system working when it comes to good IPC. So in our statement, Ted talked really clearly about our expectations of hospitals, about good timely discharge planning, and the critical need to understand someone's COVID status at the point of discharge to help inform decision making about where they may go to. I was really clear that we as the regulator would absolutely support care homes if they didn't feel able to admit someone safely. And Rosie made a statement that said, actually, this is not about care homes working in isolation. They're supporting people with increasing complex needs. And it's absolutely critical. If this works, there is system support around care homes to enable them to care for people safely. So lots of IPC activity, as well as going out and responding to risk. So that was the update I wanted to do on COVID, Peter. And then I've got two other things, but should I pause there?
Just pause for a second in case anybody wants to come in. Yes, Robert does. Robert.
Thank you, Peter. An encouraging report, if I may say so, Kate, and you and your team are doing really great work here. My question is about something we discussed last week a bit in relation to restrictions on visiting care homes in the context of what you've just been saying about infection control. And I imagine you would agree that infection control should be the servant of the care needs of people in homes, not the dictator of what it is thought people need. And there seems to be, and there has been in this past week, increasing public concerns being expressed about the restrictions on visiting and the exclusion of care home residents from participating in those decisions. Healthwatch England, ADAS and the Care Support Alliance have been working together to put some of those concerns together, and we I think have started a constructive dialogue with the Department of Health, who of course recognise the importance of human rights. But I was just wondering what you feel we, CQC, and in particular your inspectorate, can do to reinforce the need for homes and those who control infection to take account of the decisions and choices and risk assessments made by residents who are competent to make those decisions, and also the balance of best interest for those who can't in relation to the well-being they gain from seeing their families in proper circumstances rather than through a window or an iPad.
Thank you, Robert. So I think good IPC can be an enabler to making visiting happen. We've been talking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks, and our very clear message to providers is they need to follow government guidelines, they need to pay sufficient attention to what the local risk levels are and what the advice is from their directors of public health. But actually we're 7-8 months now into a pandemic, and I think at the beginning providers made the decisions they needed to make to keep their current residents safe, and I would absolutely recognise that. I think we all know all these months on the impact this is having on some people's mental well-being about not being able to regularly see their loved ones in person. So what we expect now is we expect providers to follow government guidelines, pay attention to local risks, but wherever possible, we want to see a proactive approach to making visiting happen on an individual basis where it's safe to do so. And what we will be doing when we go out and inspect services is we will be looking at their approach to visiting, how are they making it happen where it is safe to do so, but also we will be looking at that person-centred approach. So we don't want to see a blanket approach, but like some of the conversations we have around do not attempt resuscitation, we don't want to see a blanket approach to this. We want to see an individual conversation which takes into account best interests in the Mental Capacity Act and all that stuff around people being allowed to make what might be perceived as unwise decisions, while recognising that care homes have that really difficult juggling act of doing what's right for the individual while noting what might be the potential impact on their workforce and other residents as well. But the key message is good IPC should be an enabler, and we want to see a person-centred approach to making this happen wherever it is safe to do so.
Thank you. I'm really encouraged to hear that. And of course, it becomes more acute bearing in mind what Ian has just quite correctly said, which is that COVID is now here to stay with us for some considerable time. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Robert. Thanks, Kate. Kate, do you want to move on to the next item? That's
yeah, I've got two brief things to update board on. So the first is we're due to publish tomorrow a long-awaited and very important report into restraint, seclusion and segregation. So board will well remember that this is a piece of work that's been undertaken for about the last 2 years. We published an interim report last year, and we are delighted to have got to the point that we are ready now to share this report tomorrow. It's particularly important because there have been a number of reports over the last 10 years about the issue of ensuring people with learning disabilities, autistic people and people with mental health get the right support in the community to keep them well, and should they be an inpatient, that they get the right support and their human rights are upheld. So a really critical report. It's really benefited from some fantastic involvement from family members and people who have experienced being inpatients themselves. So I'd like to take this opportunity now, and we will no doubt when we discuss this further at board, to thank the many people who have helped get this report to where it is. So critical report, really looking forward to publishing it tomorrow, and really looking forward to the report driving some action on this really important topic.
So, Kate, it's a critical report in the sense that it is critically important. It's also
Yes.
critical in the sense that it is very critical of the current arrangements, and we really need to hope the report draws further attention and action as a result. Liz and then Robert.
Thanks, Kate. Yes, first of all, I'd just really like to commend the work that's been done to get us to this point of being ready to share the findings, and particularly the way that people with their own experience of segregation, seclusion, etc., have been involved, and their family members and providers and people with different kind of professional and academic expertise to come up with what I hope will be a set of recommendations that really do drive change. I suppose my question is just, do we plan to track what happens to our recommendations to ensure that they really do this time make a difference on this huge human rights agenda? Because we do know that there have been, good reports in the past, but sadly, action has been insufficient.
Thank you, Liz. So I think we would really welcome the opportunity to come back to the next public board to discuss the report and the reaction, but also to share with the board our intention about how you can continue to have the scrutiny and oversight of what we're seeing out there in terms of how the sector is responding to the report and improving outcomes for those individuals, but also how we are implementing the actions that will be there for us as well to change. So we'd really welcome to come back to talk about the report, how it's landed and reaction from stakeholders, and then how this board can give us that kind of public scrutiny about how we are implementing the recommendations.
Thanks, Kate. So, Martin, we could make that an action, please, for the next board meeting. Robert and then Ted.
Thank you. Well, firstly, to echo Liz's praise for this report, and it is a very powerful report. And I believe it's made powerful by the use that's been made and the listening given to the experiences of service users and their families. And I would like to think that had sufficient attention been paid by those who commissioned services over the years to those experiences, we might not be where we are now. But my question really is, it builds actually on our conversation about visiting, because what's true of visiting in care homes is even more acute here in relation to the a deprivation of people's human rights here, and I just wonder what it is that, there are in the report some really good recommendations to ourselves as to what we can do, But I worry a bit about what happens in relation to the individuals who even today are suffering from a form of seclusion and isolation that they just shouldn't be. When we see it, we can ask commissioners to do something about it. We can ask safeguarding boards to look at it, but our inspectors are facing actually having to meet people who are being currently deprived of their human rights. And I would just like your assurance that there is something we as an organisation can do in relation to the residents of people in services that we view as totally unacceptable, if that be the case.
So I'm sure Kate can answer the question, Robert, but yeah, I think just going back to what you said a minute ago, we will have a proper discussion in the November board after the report's been published. It's not published yet, so we'll come back to it. But Kate, do you want us to quickly respond?
So I was going to say one thing, and then I see Ted's next to speak, so he might want to say a bit more about what we've been doing in terms of when we go out and see these services. I was just going to quickly say that we only get change when everyone who's involved with this does something different. So this is about providers, commissioners, the regulator, and we really look forward to having that conversation publicly in the coming days when we're able to share the recommendations in the report.
Ted.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just reiterate what all my colleagues have said about the importance of this report? I think when people read it, when it's published tomorrow, they'll see the power of it, and the power particularly of the stories about individuals and how the system has treated them and how it has let them down. And as Robert said, how it has not respected their human rights. And I think it is absolutely clear from the case studies in it that this is a wholly unsatisfactory situation and something must be done. And this is a test for the strength of our voice that we can get this system changed. Of course, we must look to ourselves to take more effective regulatory action where we can. And just coming to Robert's point about individuals, we have been supporting individual care and treatment reviews since the interim report was published in May of last year. And we are very much reviewing what has come out of those and exploring ourselves whether we as an individual regulator could take more action about individuals who are not being looked after well by this system. But equally, I think the challenge has to be to the wider system, commissioners and everyone else involved in the system, to look to producing a humane system of care that is effective, gives people the treatment they need to lead independent and full lives, and does not put them in accommodation and facilities where their human rights are at risk. And I think it's absolutely clear that this has to be concerted action by everyone across the system. And to come back to Liz's point, there have been many reports, and this report must not be another one of those reports. And certainly, Kate and I, speaking to families and to individuals affected, we've promised that we're going to do absolutely everything to make sure this report does not become another report that doesn't really make a difference. And it's absolutely clear that we have to follow this up to make sure action is taken to protect these individuals.
Thanks, Ted. So as we say, we will have a more detailed discussion in the November board. But I think, Ted, to your point and to Liz's point, this is something we need to keep on our radar screen in successive meetings to monitor the progress that we're making ourselves, but also the commissioners and others, because it's such a fundamental commissioning point that needs to be addressed. Are we happy to move on?
Moving on to Ted.
So Ted, back to you. Thanks,
yes, thank you. So over the last few weeks, the number of COVID cases in the community has been going up, as everyone is aware, and it's affecting different parts of the country in different ways. We've been in communication with other stakeholders and, of course, with providers themselves about the impact this is having. It is already clear, talking to emergency departments across the country, that the number of people attending emergency departments is increasing. And in many ways, winter is coming a few weeks early this year. And I think that very much reflects the fact that we're operating at a time of resurgence of COVID. I'll come back to emergency departments in a moment. Inpatient numbers of COVID cases are going steadily up. They're not yet at the critical levels they were last spring, but the trajectory is clearly causing a lot of concern, particularly in some parts parts of the country. And I think so we are well aware that providers are under pressure because of the resurgence of COVID, and we are doing everything we can to support them in that context. As the board knows, we used development of the ESF, the Emergency Support Framework, to monitor the assurance around infection control across all NHS trusts. We reported last time about that. And we continue to monitor nosocomial infections with NHSI to make sure that trusts are implementing effective infection control procedures. Where we found problems, we associate trusts with the support that's available nationally, but equally where necessary we will undertake inspections and enforcement action, and we have done that in a small number of trusts over the last few weeks, and we will continue to monitor that very carefully. As Ian mentioned, we are now rolling out the Transitional Monitoring App as part of our transitional regulatory approach. The Transitional Monitoring App is built on what we learned from the Emergency Support Framework, and going forward we are focusing in hospitals on two areas. The Transitional Monitoring App does look at all key lines of inquiry, so it is a comprehensive monitoring tool, but we inevitably want to focus on those areas of risk, and of course those are infection control, but also emergency department pressures. And the board was aware that we released a new resource for trusts a couple of weeks ago called Patient First, which it was drawn on the expertise for emergency departments across the country about how best to deal with the pressures that emergency departments are under going into winter, particularly a winter with COVID present. That was very well received, and I have a lot of very positive feedback, and I know trusts and wider systems have found it useful. I've written to all NHS trusts to say, look, this is important. Please make sure your board is aware of it, and we will be coming back to you to ask you how you're using it. And we're using the Transitional Monitoring App as a tool to go back to all NHS trusts. Over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will speak to every trust with an emergency department to see how they're using that guidance, that resource, to make sure they're providing the safest possible care under the pressures they face. And so by mid-November, we'll have a very good view about how trusts are managing emergency department pressures. Now, as we go into winter, we will be undertaking some risk-based inspections of emergency departments, but we want to combine services under pressure while we need to continue to do risk-based inspections. We think our main role is to provide support so that people are accessing the resources they need to provide the best care possible. And so we are a balanced approach going forward. And we are now developing a similar approach around maternity. People will remember in the State of Care last week that we highlighted our ongoing concerns about safety in maternity services. We're working with other stakeholders across the system to ensure that trusts are getting the support they need to make sure they're providing the safest possible maternity care. And we will be, we're planning a programme of risk-based inspections over the next 6 months or so, based upon the guidance that we've provided already on maternity services and based upon the support that they're getting from the rest of the system. So we're coordinating with the system, providing support, but following that up with inspections and enforcement action where necessary. And that is our continual plan going forward. Can I just highlight a few reports that Chris is going to talk about in a few minutes because I think they're important just to note them in passing. Tomorrow we're publishing ionising radiation medical exposure regulations report. That's IRMA report, which is a report aimed at professionals, so it's not a report for the general public. But having said that, it is an important report on an important area of regulation that we undertake. And can I just pay tribute to the IRMA team who've continued to provide regulation of the 30 million ionising radiation medical exposures every year in this country over the last period during the COVID and the epidemic, and they've continued to provide that regulation. And the report is a great account of the work they've been doing during COVID to make sure that we're maintaining our vigilance around ionising radiation. And they've also responded at the same time, just before the COVID pandemic, to an international review of the UK's the regulation of ionising radiation. So they have had a busy year, and I think the report is, if you like, a reflection of the work that's gone in. So can I pay tribute to them? There are two other reports that have come out recently. One is a report that came out at the same time as State of Care on mental health care within acute trusts. It's an important report. It was delayed coming out because of COVID, but I think one of our biggest concerns around emergency departments and to some extent inpatient services in acute trusts is that people with mental health needs are not necessarily getting the care they should within the acute sector. And if you talk to emergency departments, they will say to you that there's a rising numbers of people attending emergency departments, but there's a particular increase around people with acute mental health needs. And this report is really very important about talking about how mental health services and acute trusts can work together to make sure that people get the care they need within acute services. There's also a couple of other reports. One is an update on inpatient mental health rehabilitation services, which we produced a report on a year or so ago, and one on child and adolescent mental health services as well. Now, those are both update reports, and I suppose I think they're both important in their own right, but they both reflect the fact that reports we published a year or so ago, while they were important at the time, the progress that we wanted to see on both those areas has not taken place. Now, some of that may be due to the COVID pandemic, but I think we need to keep coming back to those areas to make sure the system does meet the needs of people who need these services going forward. Thank you, Peter. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you, Ted. And again, just reflects the sort of breadth and depth of the activity that's going on. But like you, I'd like to particularly thank the IRMA team because they're sort of pretty unsung heroes in our organisation, but they do a great job. So thank you. Any questions for Ted? No.
Rosie. For Rosie.
Ah, right.
It's
so, Dr. Trenholm, over to you.
Yes, I wish that were true. So I just want to pick up some things from primary medical services and integrated care. I think first thing is provider collaboration reviews. The board will be aware that we've had a programme of doing provider collaboration reviews. That's now rolling forward. We're on site again for the next tranche of reviews. So that programme is continuing. It's also worth noting that we were asked of weeks ago to do what's referred to as a Section 48 thematic review. We were asked by the Secretary of State to carry out a review on end-of-life care planning, particularly do not attempt CPR. I think there's a concern from some people that blanket do not attempt CPR orders and blanket personalised care planning, particularly end of life, is being used inappropriately. And our view is that end of life care in particular must be personalised. And so we're doing a piece of work that's going to look at the information that we have from members of the public already, plus do some deep dives into individual cases to understand exactly what's going on, and I'm sure we'll find some very good practice, and we'll want to put that on the table in the way that we have with a number of other topic areas, but also where we see poorer practice that we can address that as well. So we're expecting to be able to do that work over the next couple of months with an interim report before Christmas, and then a final report very early in the new year. We've also had a number of reports around access to GP appointments and real concerns that particularly during COVID, people have struggled to access GP appointments, and we want to understand what is going on there, and exactly what that means from an individual member of the public point of view. So we're shaping up some thematic work at the moment around GP appointments, so we can understand exactly the size and shape of the problem, because we're conscious that we have a range of different reports ranging from GPs that are doing a fantastic job through to people who are concerned that their GP is closed, and we just want to understand that in more detail, and we're working with colleagues at Healthwatch in particular, as well as pulling our own information from Give Feedback on Care. So a number of things going on there, and we're going to shape that piece of work over the next week. But I thought, sorry, the next this month rather. But I just wanted to make board aware that that's a topic that we are looking at. We are also doing a number of special measures inspections. There are about 100 GP practices in special measures. So again, we are doing some specific inspections on those special measures practices to make sure that the public can be assured that good care is being delivered. And where we have got issues, then of course we can take action. The other thing I wanted just to flag was the inspection of safe houses work. We've signed a memorandum of understanding between ourselves and the Home Office to start a programme of inspection of safe houses for people who are victims of trafficking and modern slavery. We think this is probably the first of it. This programme is the first of its kind in the world, and we're hoping to produce some insights into how well people who are incredibly vulnerable are looked after. And then finally, just to note that we are working with our colleagues at Ofsted on a special educational needs and disabilities programme of inspections. And again, the second stage of that will be delivered in November, and then a third stage in the early part of 2021, probably in January. So we'll be sharing the results of that with colleagues at Ofsted. So a quick sort of canter through quite a lot of work that's going on in primary medical services and integrated care. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. I was particularly pleased about the safe houses work. I mean, it's so important in its own right, but I think it also reflects really well on Rosie and her team that the Home Office have asked us to do this work. So that's really good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're happy to move on then to Kirsty, performance update.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to pick up the people bits, and then I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's going to just talk through the performance report for this month. So just in terms of people, just a couple of things to make you aware of. We have our all-staff conference at the beginning of November, Connect and Share. This is the first opportunity we've had really to get the entire organisation together to talk, to connect and to talk about our new strategy and our priorities for the organisation. I think that the technology really gives us that opportunity to do that. It's running over the next 3 days, and we have a range of speakers which are coming together to give us a sort of a comprehensive program around our strategy, our leadership, and our focus for going forward. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think the other area in our people work that we just wanted to highlight is we are continuing to focus on making sure our colleagues are supported during this busy period for us, and particularly through the working at home through the pandemic. We've now got our entire workforce has been working at home now pretty much since March. Which is a different environment for some. Others it's just business as usual, but we want to make sure that people are supported. We have launched recently a good work habits campaign to give them some helpful tips about how to maintain that healthy work-life balance whilst working through home, and to help to keep their focus on well-being, so we have a happy, healthy and engaged workforce during this period. I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who's going to talk just through the performance data.
Thanks, Kirsty. Just a few headlines for me. In terms of registration, at the end of August, simple applications is continuing to improve. It's taken 14.5 days on average to process, and that's where we see most of the volumes, with 1,100 processed in month. Complex applications is 117.6 days. But with much lower volumes, with only 37 processed in month. So both those areas will continue to monitor the progress of changes we've made in terms of our internal processes. In terms of regulatory action, Kate referenced some figures earlier for ASC, but so just build on those with a complete picture. And this is as at Monday. I thought we'd better to give a complete picture. So from the start of the year until right up to the start of this week, we've undertaken over 19,000 calls with locations, which is 43% of applicable registered services. We've also undertaken 1,630 inspections, 1,460 with a site visit, and of those inspections that were triggered by risk, 54% are triggered by information of concern, whether it's safeguarding, whistleblowing, information of concern or complaints. Linked to that, we're seeing an ever-increasing volume of whistleblowing cases. August had the highest volume received in the last 12 months, and that continues to trend that way. Some areas of strong performance, just to mention, 97% of safeguarding alerts have been referred to within 1 day, which is ahead of the 95% target. Safeguarding concerns with mandatory actions recorded within 5 days on target at 95%, and 100% of urgent enforcement action is undertaken within 3 days. Lastly, on finance, revenue budget is a similar trend to what we discussed last month, which is forecast to be 4.4 million underspent at the end of the year. This includes a potential 1.8 million shortfall on income. Capital budget is forecast to be 3.3 million overspent. However, that's been actively managed down at present. So that was it for me. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Just that 19,000 number is quite significant, isn't it? We've never done anything like that before. I think we should really sort of note it and congratulate colleagues on it, but also then think about how we sort of build on that for the future. Really, really, really impressive. Anybody wants to come in? Gosh, we're on a roll. Mark, your luck may run out here. Who knows? But Mark? His luck has run out, or maybe his broadband has run out. We'll come back to Mark. Chris, can you talk about strategy?
Yes, well, I've got, I'll try and condense 7.5 pages of exec summary into something that's meaningful for the group. Just to touch on some things that people have already mentioned. Ted mentioned the patient first review and the of A&E. What I really like about this, and I think what the feedback we've had so far is, it's written by CQC with frontline clinicians, so it tells a really important story about what people can do practically as they approach winter. So it's had already some good feedback, as Ted mentioned. I think it's a good way of operating for us to provide practical guidance and assurance around how services can adapt and change. There's been a conversation already about right support, right care, right culture, which I think gives, again, some really practical expectations that we have as an organisation about how providers meet fundamental standards when dealing with autistic people and people with learning disabilities. As Ted mentioned, we've also published 3 mental health reports alongside the state of care. They talk about particularly access to services and rehabilitation, so how you encourage people to get access early and how we make sure those services are available, and also how the wider health and care system supports rehabilitation for people. State of care out last week. I think the messages about the fragility pre-COVID, particularly around NHS, emergency services, maternity, mental health, the ongoing fragility of the adult social care service, and also the volatility in some parts of the primary medical services was well understood by the stakeholder comments that we had back. Equally understood was the need to, in order to have a local understanding, a local plan for action, it's important that local providers and leaders can come together to develop a plan that's meaningful to all of the people in their care, so that it minimises what at the moment are growing inequalities in the way people receive those cares. And the notion of having a long-term deal for adult social care with a workforce plan behind it was again something that hit home with colleagues. I think it's something we will return to again. I think these reports are important because they continue to surface problems that we need to have a long-term action on. So we're hopeful that we'll continue those discussions with both parliamentarians, providers and public groups as we go into the autumn and winter. There are 3 reports out which look at how CQC is driving improvement in the wider system. I just want to touch upon those because they link to the conversation about the strategy. They're looking at partly about how we focus on the relationship between inspectors and providers, how we demonstrate that we've got accessible guidance to drive change and improvement, And I think there's some important lessons there about making sure we understand the environment that providers are operating in, building on the relationships that we have with providers, and also working with other parts of the system to drive meaningful change and critically involving people who use services in that change. There's also a report about the well-led framework, and again, I think that shows the importance of leadership in action that directly links to service improvement, and that leadership isn't just a function of governance and processes, it's also about culture and engaging people and service users in that work. And also the strong alignment between CQC's well-led framework and other organisations' plans, particularly the NHS people plan. So all of those things are fed into the conversation, the discussion document that we've published recently on the strategy. And as colleagues have said, it's a design to engage a conversation over the next few months before a formal consultation in the new year. There's been a positive feedback from it, but also extensive conversations that are ongoing to help understand where we might need to develop our thinking further, so that when we get to a formal consultation, we'll have not just the basis of a plan, but also how we can implement that plan successfully. In addition to that work, we've had some parliamentary activity. Ted's given some important evidence as Select Committee on the 29th of September, looking at safety in maternity. He talked in particular about a blame culture and whistleblowing, and how we need to shift from that to a learning culture where people can express concern and operate together to drive change and improvements. Rosie has given some important evidence to the independent inquiry on child sexual abuse. And Ian has also met with a number of members of the Health Select Committee. In terms of report to come, I won't recover what's already been covered, but just to say on the report coming out tomorrow, the Restraint, Exclusion and Segregation report, can I just thank the families who've been involved in that piece of work, and also the team that have been involved in that work. I think we've got a very clear set of actions. I think one of the things that the ambiguity of other reports is just who needs to do what by when. And I think we've given a really clear sense of what action needs to be taken by whom in order to drive the right change. And I think that's something that we can rightfully be proud of, but it's not a piece of work. It's not a one day in the media. This is an ongoing campaign to make this work. The Mental Health Act report, which is also our assessment of mental health services more generally, will come to the board next month, and we published it in late November. Ted mentioned the IRMA report, and I think particularly looking at how people have focused on changes as a result of COVID. So how has the treatment and diagnostic services operated during the COVID period is an important thing that we shouldn't forget that the organisations have adapted to. And finally, we've got the next spike of Give Feedback on Care. As mentioned earlier, we've got an exemplary service now with Give Feedback on Care, and we've been working really well with partners. The next spike is on older people, targeting older people and their families to give their feedback on services as we approach winter. There's been a tremendous amount of involvement from the public engagement team, but also from organisations that represent different groups. I just thank them for their continued involvement in that. It is absolutely vital at this time that we continue to get their feedback. And indeed, in terms of where we go for our inspection activity, a lot of that inspection activity is guided by the risks that we see in services as a result of the feedback we get from people. That's it for me, Peter.
So not much going on in your area then, Chris. Anybody want to come in on anything? Oh, it's really great work. Thank you. Mark, can we come back to you now? Sorry about earlier.
No, thanks, Peter. Apologies. A short one from me. So on information and cybersecurity risk, there are no issues to report this month. Excellent.
Okay, so is there anything anybody wants to raise we haven't covered on the executive team reports? Brilliant, thanks everybody. So in which case, let's move on to the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian 6-monthly report. And I think we have with us Carolyn Jenkinson, Uma Dafta and Julie Lindsay Ains. Is that right? Are you all three here?
Yes, I think we are.
Excellent. So I have no idea who wants to speak first. So
so I'm going to take us through the report. So morning, everybody. Thanks to the board for receiving our Freedom to Speak Up report today. We're grateful to have the opportunity to share it with you. As you know, we've got 3 guardians now in CQC, and we've been in post since April this year. And we've been working over the last 6 months really just to raise awareness about our new appointments, and also about planning how best to operationalise having 3 guardians across the commission. So we've been working hard on that, and we've got a good idea about what we need to do. But as it's been said already earlier on in the board meeting, just want to draw your attention to October being Speak Up Month. And we were really fortunate here at CQC to start off the month. We had an event which was attended by over 100 people within CQC. Ian opened up our day. We had a talk from Henrietta, the National Guardian, and our very own Sir Robert also joined us, which we were grateful for. And then we also had a speaker, an external speaker, who talked about the importance of listening, and that was Professor Megan Ritz. It was a really good day, and there was some really, really rich and powerful discussion during the day, which gave us a lot of things to focus on. And actually, it's really helped us formulate what we need to do next within our organisation to really develop our culture even further. So we talked a lot about the barriers, and that we still have barriers for people feeling able to speak up, and that people still don't feel confident in all cases to speak up. We talked a lot about the importance of listening, because speaking up is very often around, once you do that, you need to feel that you've been heard. So we really need to focus on that. And we also heard from staff that they want to know what's happened as a result of them speaking up, and goes back to that so what question that we always ask when we're regulating providers. What is the so what as a result of what you've done? So we want to focus a lot more on that as we go through the next part of the year. It's fair to say, like many other organisations, we've still got a lot more to do. We're not complacent at all, and we know you're not complacent either as a board. We've still got more to do on our culture, but we do think that we're making a little bit of progress. You can see in the report we've given you some data on the last 6 months' activity. There isn't much there for us to provide any meaningful analysis on, and actually one of them, the Speak Up Guardians, one of the 3 of us, is Uma, is an analyst expert, so she can't do it, then there's no hope for any of us. But what we can tell you, just from looking at what comes through, that there tends to be 2 camps with things that come through to us, and a lot of what comes through is very much based on simple misunderstandings that grow and grow and grow amongst people, and often we just need to, either us or our ambassadors just need to intervene a little bit and just help sort those misunderstandings out. And we know, don't we, because probably we've all experienced this as well, when you get misunderstandings, often they grow and they cause anxiety, and they just escalate. We have had 2 contacts in recent times from 2 whistleblowers who wanted to raise things, and we've progressed those into more formal investigations. And while I won't go into detail about those here, what I would say is we didn't find evidence to uphold the concerns, but nevertheless there was some learning for our organisation, and particularly in one of the cases, and we will take that forward with the organisation as well. You did ask us last time we talked to you whether you'd seen we'd seen any increases in concerns coming through as a result of the pandemic, and we've had a look at that data, and we haven't got anything to report on that relates to the pandemic. We've noticed a slight increase in contacts since we presented about our role at one of Ian's all calls, so we think that was worthwhile doing. And we've only had 1 concern come to us that directly relates to the pandemic, where somebody raised some concerns about going out on an inspection and the PPE issues. And I just want to end, and before we open up to any questions, just to note really that we are very grateful for the support that we've received from the organisation. We particularly want to just note that we have received a lot of support from executive leaders, as well as the board. And Sir Robert, we were really grateful for you coming to our the Speak Up Day. But what we found is if we have gone to executive leaders within the organisation, we've found that they've responded really, really well to us and have been very, very supportive for that, and have been very quick to respond. And I think that demonstrates from the top down position what we want within CQC. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Carolyn. Anybody want to come in? So, Carolyn, you made the point that a lot of the referrals to you were really the result of misunderstandings that had festered. So I guess the question in my mind is, are there generic learnings that come out of those that we need to absorb? I mean, there will always be misunderstandings, I suppose, but it would be nice if there were fewer of them and that they got untangled before they festered. So it may be something that you want to come back to, but it would be really interesting if there are some sort of generic learnings for us, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there are generic things, but I do, it comes down to a lot of that of working from home, messages that get read in the wrong way, don't they, sometimes on email. So making sure our managers and leaders think about the things that they say in an email and how that is received is often very important.
Yeah, and I do sometimes wonder if there isn't the other side of that. So I don't disagree at all that it's up to managers to think, or any of us to think carefully about what we put into an email. But sometimes, and maybe this is a generic point, people need to find a way of going back if they are offended or unclear or whatever, rather than let it escalate.
Yeah,
it sort of takes two to tango, perhaps. Anyway, Mark Saxton, you wanted to come in, and then Robert.
Thanks, Chairman. Carolyn, thanks very much for the report, and thanks for articulating it so well. A couple of questions. Barriers you mentioned, and I just wonder what the barriers are. I imagine that in the world we're in at the moment, some of the barriers are access, and people finding you in the organisation in a team setting. And I wonder whether some of the barriers may also be about knowledge. So the knowledge of the guardian and who you are and what you do, and you sort of referred to a spike in your contacts following your work with Ian in one of his sessions. So I just sort of wonder about that, if you could comment on that, access and knowledge, and how you're going to build that. And then also about ambassadors, I thought it's really good that you've got training lined up. Could you just sort of help me to understand how many ambassadors will we then have fully trained within the CQC? Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think the barriers are so much about staff not knowing how to get hold of an ambassador or us. I mean, maybe there is some of that, and we constantly do need to keep raising awareness, but there is quite a lot of information on our on our intranet about the Speak Up role, and we do go out and talk at team meetings and things. I think sometimes not all staff, what we hear is not all staff still feel confident to go through that route, for whatever reason, maybe that they're frightened about what that would mean, and so we still need to do a lot more about making sure people feel safe in order to come forward. And I think that goes back to what I was saying about making sure that we then feed back to the Commission as a whole to say, somebody came forward with X and this is what we did about it. And it may be that we actually can't change what they're raising with us, and there isn't the solution isn't what they actually wanted, but we need to show that they could do that and there weren't repercussions and they could do it in a safe way, and educate them really that it is okay to speak up. In terms of the ambassadors, Julie might want to say something, because Julie tends to lead with the ambassadors a bit more than I do, but we've got over 100 ambassadors, and I think we'll be in a position, Julie, Do you want to say something?
No, that's right, Carolyn. We've got at least 60 ambassadors that are currently trained and working voluntarily, and then we've got some trainer training that's been put together by the Academy, which is really positive. So that we'll have some trained ambassadors who will be able to train new ambassadors. So it'll be an ongoing internal. So yeah, it's good.
So Uma, did you want to come in on the barriers point?
It was, thank you, Peter. It was just really to echo what Carolyn was saying. I think what we've heard is most people saying that it's not that we don't know how to speak up or whom to speak up to. We just don't feel heard because we're not sure anything is done as a consequence of speaking up. So I think, as Carolyn said, one of the actions that we should take away is to actually talk a little bit about what we did following that speak up, so people feel that there is some work in speaking up, because there is some action that follows, even if it is clearing a misunderstanding. It is helpful, I think, to do that. So I just wanted to add to what Carolyn said, really.
No, thank you. And from what you were saying, Carolyn, earlier, I mean, there is action, as you say, whether it's just clearing up a misunderstanding or whatever. So that's a message we need to get out. Robert, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thanks for inviting me to your event the other day. I really enjoyed that. My question actually partly about operationalising what you do. And I wondered, in terms of barriers, is there any form of perceived barrier in relation to how people get in touch with you? Bearing in mind we're not in an office, you can't have a water cooler conversation very easily. Are there means of communicating with you, the Guardians, or your ambassadors, as it were, outside the CQC email system? Because the one fear in some organisations, I don't know if it exists in ours, is that anything goes into the system is recorded, and other people know about it before you do, in effect. So, is there that concern or not?
We haven't heard that concern, and it's not something that I think we've discussed actually, but we don't have a way of contacting us through an external mechanism. We do have a Speak Up email address that goes into a specific inbox, but I mean, maybe, again, that's something for us to consider.
Okay, just a thought.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Anybody else want to raise anything? Okay, so listen, Julie, Uma and Carolyn, thank you very much, not just for coming to the board now, but more particularly for what you're doing in the organisation in this role, on top of your other roles. So it's really, really important and really helpful. And, as ever, if not only will we see you again for the next update, but if there's anything you need from us as a board to support your work, then at any time, please get in touch. So great, and thank you again for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. So that then, I think, Paul, takes us on to the ACGC Audit Committee report, please.
Thank you, Peter. A routine meeting in many ways, I think, and the report updates on the things that we've been looking at. I think one point of note was the Health Watch England session that we have with the Chief Executive and a member of their equivalent to the ACG committee. And we do that twice a year. And actually, I think it was very pleasing to see the continued improvement in the control environment, I think, within HWE and the not only the control environment, but the identification of risks there in a very sensible way, and a way which highlights what is really at the top end of their risk register in that respect. And I thought that was very good. We appreciated that. And also to note that I think the collaboration between CQC and HWE is continuing to improve. There are still points of slight irritation in a way, which tend to be around the way that procurement works, that we're a bit top heavy in terms of process for some of the things that HWE need to do. But Kirsty and her team are doing a great job of trying to smooth that out as far as possible, and it does seem to be less of an irritation than was, say, a year or so ago. So I think that's good. I think it's really important as well, because my observation would be that the work that Healthwatch England is doing is increasingly important and relevant to everything that we do, and in general, actually, to the sector as a whole. So I think that was a really positive session around that.
Thank you, Paul. Imagine you're happy to hear that, Robert. So.
Always. I just pay tribute to our Audit and Risk and Finance Committee, which is absolutely fabulous. But I'd also like to confirm what Paul has just said, that relations with CQC and how they work together has visibly improved in my time, and I take no credit for that personally at all. It's entirely due to others, and it has resulted, I think, in both parties having a much better understanding of HWE's finances and what costs what and who's paying for it and why, in a way which probably wasn't the case in the past. So I think all that is really good news.
Great, thank you. So that takes us to any other business, if there is any. Silence is golden. We've got two questions from Robin Pike. So the first is, how does CQC capture outpatient experiences with hospitals? Many patients find the arrangements for making appointments to be difficult. Ted, it's a hospital's point. Do you want to answer?
Thank you, Peter. I think Robin is entirely right to raise this as an issue. We do pick up and have picked up on our inspections dissatisfaction with some hospital outpatient services, particularly the high volume services such as ophthalmology and fracture clinics. And I think we seek that feedback from the patients, both in the clinics themselves, but also looking at the trust feedback, and of course give feedback on care is a very vital resource in that. That feedback is reflected in our inspection reports and in any enforcement action we take on terms of improving the responsiveness of outpatient clinics. So that is an ongoing theme, and it has been an ongoing theme. And if you look at the ratings for outpatients, you'll see that it is reflected in that going forward. So I think Robin is right, is an area to keep focus on. During the COVID pandemic, we stopped routine inspections. We are continuing to monitor feedback on outpatients, and we discuss that with trusts during our routine follow-up calls with them. And of course, we'll build it into our monitoring using the Transitional Monitoring App going forward. Interestingly enough, when the COVID pandemic started and many outpatients were switched to remote, particularly telephone calls, we got a lot of positive feedback about that from patients. I have to say, as the pandemic has progressed, that positive feedback has become more measured, and I think some patients are finding remote consultations difficult. And certainly we are challenging organisations where we're getting that feedback to ensure that they do consider the needs of all their patients and don't transfer to complete remote outpatient clinics. So I think this is an ongoing area, but as we go back to routine inspections, we will need to focus again on outpatients going forward.
Thanks, Ted. And then Robin's second question is, how does CQC currently monitor patient access to NHS dental services? And Rosie would normally answer this question. What I can say to you, Robin, is actually currently we don't. Our focus is on quality and safety, but as Ian, standing in for Rosie, said earlier, we are looking generally at access into general practice as a result of COVID, and I think Ian, that's likely to extend across into dental services as well. So that's a sort of half an answer, Robin, and if Rosie wants to add anything, she can do that either outside the meeting or at our next meeting. So I hope that's okay. Those were the only two questions we had from the public. So on that note, I think we can end this meeting. So thank you all very much indeed.